there's politics that plays into these models where people want to state that this is the only way to see the mind or the brain. And it's much healthier and it's much more productive to think in terms of, well, these are different models and all models kind of have a truth or a reality to them. And if we consider that perspective, then it gives us a bigger picture and a better picture of what we're dealing with.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I'm Debra Berndt Maldonado, here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Yes.
And it's springtime.
Yes.
So are you enjoying the
I
warm
love
weather?
I went on my bike for the first time yesterday. It was wonderful. Today we are starting a new series on all the great minds of the mind, the great teachers, the forebearers of personal development. We're going to be talking about them in each episode, but today we're going to just do an overview. But before we begin, I do want to remind you to click the button here if you're watching us on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. If you are listening to us on iTunes or Spotify or any of the other podcast services, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you every week and tune in for this amazing series that's coming up. Today's topic is the 4 ways to work with the mind. And we're going to talk about the different schools and really the history of psychology and working with the mind, which is very fascinating because you get so, like, you're online and you're doing all these different, hearing all these different teachers and where do their ideas come from? And I think this is a really great introduction to that.
Yeah, so we'd like to dedicate this to all the students of the mind out there that are interested in this incredible topic that is really very young, but also very old. And we'll explain what we mean by that.
And I'd like to really dedicate this episode to our wonderful team at Creative Mind. They are just incredible people. They do the work just like all of us, and they are just, it's just a gift to work with all of them and what they contribute to this work. And the people that edit the podcast, that post it, that market our business, work behind the scenes in the technology, even enroll our coaches. It's just a beautiful, beautiful process that our team supports us in getting this great work out there. So well, from signing someone up to making sure they have a good experience, we just want to welcome you. Thank you, team members, Creative Mind team members, for all your great work.
Yeah, thank you guys.
So let's talk about what's the history of working with the mind? How did this all begin? Is it the caveman era, like pounding, finding the rock and making it a wheel? Like what is, or making fire? Where did it begin?
Yeah.
Do we want to go that far back?
We do, because we want to see the big picture. And human beings, we're getting more and more a picture of what our history on the planet is. And we certainly have to start to think in these terms of one big community, right? Instead of dividing ourselves into these different groups. We're all human beings and we all have the same mind. You can check it out, right? Go to another part of the world and any person that you meet, their mind will work pretty much the same way your mind works.
And even in like a different social or economic levels, everyone worries about money. Everyone worries about their family. Everyone worries about their health. Everyone worries about having a meaningful, happy life. No matter where you are, how much money you make or how little money you make, we're all dealing with the same human problems.
Yes. Yeah, so in the big picture, right, and very broad, with very broad strokes, we can think about humans starting to become self-aware, maybe 200,000 years, maybe a little bit more. Depends on where you draw the line between our animal nature and then our human nature. But by 200,000 years ago, we were developing art. We were painting on the walls of caves and putting our handprints on things and saying, I'm here, I'm self-aware.
I'm telling you a story about my life and what happened.
I'm interested in animals. I'm interested in hunting. I'm interested in in storytelling.
Yeah.
And so there was probably, because we start to see people burying other people and caring for them, right? We know from the archaeological evidence, people that broke their leg were taken care of by other people, meaning there was a sense of community, the sense of caring for each other, which is kind of a spiritual element as well. So the mind then begins to take shape around that time, where we start to self-reflect, and shamanism comes about, ideas of the gods, ideas of nature gods, rain, famine, or
The sun god.
the sun was worshipped as well. Animals were considered to be godlike, or at least part of that dream world that people were very familiar with. That there was this something going on besides their physical life.
And the dreams were probably more investigated back then too, because it's this other window to another world. And I would think that they probably saw that more as a more superstitious in that time, because they didn't have that developed understanding.
Well, superstition is a strong word. I would say from our perspective, we would consider it that way. But from their perspective, it was simply the way they experienced the world. So it wasn't necessarily superstition. It was more that they were connected to nature and still very much kind of embedded in nature. Whereas now we're a little bit more isolated. We like to think, at least, of ourselves as separate from nature.
So as we go forward in history, because we're not going to stay in the caveman era, we start to, where does it go from there?
So then you start to develop agriculture, and the dates, we'll leave it up to the scholars to that, but let's say about 10,000 years ago, people start to develop this agriculture, so that it allowed human beings to form cities.
And then also communities, and
and then you start to get institutions, so you start to get temples.
And then the wise men, like the academics, and started writing, right? They now, instead of using pictures on walls, they started writing texts and in their, either hieroglyphics or in books, like in ancient Greece. And
that's an incredible breakthrough, because now you could write down your thoughts, imprint your thoughts on tablets, and communicate your mind essentially to another mind, and then keep a record of what you learned, so that the next generation could use that information. Whereas before, it was like
passed down by story, right?
It was passed down through stories,
or songs,
chanting, songs, dances, and those kind of things. But anyway, worldwide, a lot of people don't think of the Americas, but in the Americas, there were advanced civilizations like the Maya, the Aztecs, the Inca, the North American tribes. They all had their own psychologies. In other words, their own way of understanding spirit, the movement of nature,
the cycles,
astronomy, astrology. All this was part of these advanced cultures. In Europe, in Asia, also very advanced cultures, also very interested in astronomy, astrology as well. In other words, how were these stars and these constellations impacting life on Earth? And what were the cycles of nature, not only on the planet, but in the cosmos? The mind at that time, of course, was more, because there wasn't that differentiation, people kind of understood magic, religion, spirituality, psychology, medicine all together. There wasn't the division that, you're a psychologist and you're a...
Like the alchemists were scientists, but they were also spiritualists at the same time.
That's right. Most of the priests, men and women, were both scientists and healers and priests and priestesses. So it was all kind of taught to them in this holistic way.
Is it also too that less individual and more group mind? Like the tribe is like the force, and like aligning the tribe versus like every individual gets to like explore their own path.
Yes. There's always been individuals, though, that really move the culture forward, right? That they're just brilliant for some reason. They're geniuses, and they come up with ideas that transform culture. So that's always been a part of it, that there is a culture that supports the individual, but then individuals themselves have visions, dreams, ideas
to pull the culture forward, or start a new culture even.
That's right.
You know, a new way of being that breaks away. And then major religions had that same experience too. They kind of, whether Eastern or Western religions, they all kind of had that kind of foundational, and then there's like these splits of, you know, different ideas moving forward.
Yes. And so from our perspective, right, we know the Greeks had a big influence on our current culture, but the Greeks also were highly influenced by Indian philosophy through Alexander the Great. They shared ideas about yoga, about meditation. Even Buddhism was kind of communicated to the Greeks through the connection with Alexander the Great. And then the Romans kind of created a whole empire that included so many different cultures that ideas kind of came together in Rome and created, kind of new ways of seeing the world and new ways of seeing the mind, and medicine kind of evolved from there. So it's a rich history of human beings always grappling with this idea. What is the mind? How does it work? What are we
in? Who am I? And what is this universe that we're in? And the nature, what are the laws of nature?
Yes. After the fall of Rome, then we go through the Middle Ages, where a lot of the ideas are lost, or apparently lost. Of course, they're never completely lost, because otherwise they wouldn't be here. But they lose favor in the sense that people aren't paying attention to them as much. So they survive through the Greeks that left a lot of manuscripts behind, and some of the Arab cultures actually got a hold of them and started to translate them and to experiment with them. So for a while, the Middle East was this rich kind of breeding ground of new ideas and philosophy. Then the Enlightenment comes, where people started, after the Renaissance, people started to think about humanism. That maybe we as humans have the ability to develop and direct our own destiny.
Versus like, how do we survive as a tribe and as a community? Now it's like, how do I basically become an individual?
Yes, and independent of the gods, which was a very new idea, because previously...
Like almost like to determine your own destiny versus what the gods have destined for you?
Yes. If you look at history from this lens, before the Enlightenment, most societies were theocentric, meaning they saw themselves as worshiping God, or a god, or several gods, and at the mercy of these gods. That the gods essentially determined what human culture and human destiny was about. Humanism, after the Renaissance and through the Enlightenment, was this idea that we as humans have incredible power if we are willing to develop it and use it. So cultivating that humanism. Now, humanism, as we'll see, is still around in psychology, because it was such an important idea. And of course, science grew out of there with the scientific method. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that science was actually developed by mystics.
Well, the rishis in
the rishis in India, yes, absolutely. But also Newton. Newton was an alchemist. Most of his writings were about alchemy.
I know, they think he's like the hard scientist.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's a dirty little secret in science that the scientific method, the way...
Well, Leonardo da Vinci, too, was a lot of his stuff was spiritually...
Yes. Of course, da Vinci was way before Newton, but but Newton spent a lot of his time trying to figure out alchemical kind of formulas and processes. And by the way, he said, here's this calculus that we can use to measure the universe.
And that's all he's known for versus the...
Yeah. But incredible power came through science and the scientific method, which we're still kind of grappling with today, of course, with AI now and kind of the power that it's giving us as through technology, that we're starting to question or let's put it this way. The same old questions are now taking center stage because now they're becoming more important. Again, what is consciousness? What is the mind? What do we do with it?
And so now we're going to go into the models that, because we skipped over like this big piece of modern psychology, went from the Newton now to AI, but there's this huge contribution, all these minds that I would say the modern world, but post, about 100 years ago, this is really the development of psychology. Like in first, didn't they use a lot of physical ways to measure what's happening with the body? They measured the size of the brain, the skull, the size of the head, phrenology, and then they also put them in cold water if they were having neurotic episodes, like kind of or shocking them. This mechanical way of working with a disturbed mind, and then Freud came up with this idea of, what if we talk to them? What if we just talk to them? Yeah. And that opened up this whole new idea, which is where coaching arises from and therapy, from this idea of, well, let's have someone self-reflect.
Yeah. Yeah, the turn of the century, 1900, was a big turning point. That's where Freud publishes his interpretation of dreams, which opens up this whole new school of the mind. That and Freud is really, we have to give him credit for it, even though he was wrong on a lot of things. Of course, he was a pioneer, so he wasn't going to get everything right.
But that's what science is. It's like the scientific theory isn't. Yeah. It's a scientific fact. There's never a scientific fact. It's always a theory until the next theory proves it wrong. And a true scientist would want to disprove its theory to make sure that it's valid. So I wouldn't say Freud was wrong. He was just has a theory that was now proven to be not on the mark.
Absolutely. There's either support for the theory or there's lack of support. And for Freud's work, there's both. There's plenty of support that, we still talk about defense mechanisms, about the ego, about repressed wishes,
and dreams, and the Freudian slip. We always hear that a lot.
But a lot of his psychosexual theory and his ideas on child development, not so much. Yeah. There's not that much.
The refrigerator
support.
Mother.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. Well, we're going to talk about the 4 ways to work with the mind in modern psychology, and that is the psychodynamic model, the behaviorism, cognitive behavioral therapy, and also our cognitive behavioral coaching, and the biomedical model, the model of neuroscience. So those are the 4 kind of main ways or branches that now we're in this modern world with all this history of us developing ourselves as human beings and understanding who we are and what the world is and why we're here. We can break it into these kind of, there's many, many models, but this would be kind of the 4 main schools, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of breaking up the ideas in psychology, but these kind of hit the main ones. Certainly psychodynamic models, which is the schools that evolved and emerged from Freud and Jung's work.
And psychodynamic means, in layman's terms?
Yeah, it's interesting.
How would you describe it?
If you think about, most of us think of the mind as singular, right? That there's this little I in me, the sense of self that I'm experiencing, and I'm doing things, and I'm thinking this and doing that. But the psychodynamic model paints it more as there's a little committee in our brain or in our mind that is arguing between themselves and trying to decide things. So that's where the dynamic part of the model comes from.
And does it mean that they're unconscious?
Yeah. So if you think of it, we have instincts, we have animalistic instincts inherited from our animal nature that are still around, and then the higher parts of our mind have to deal with those and dampen those and keep those under control.
Because we live in a cultured society, and we can't like take off our clothes and growl in the streets and attack other people like an animal, or, go into the grocery store and just start eating the food right there because we're hungry. We have this like, oh, we have to wait in line. We have to, drive and be nice. And so we're suppressing a lot of because we are, evolved from animals. So we didn't lose any of that. It's just repressed. And then also this idea of a conditioning too, that we have a personal life. We've been molded and shaped by our past experience. And so the things that weren't acceptable in our culture were repressed as well. So not only just as a whole, as human beings, repressing the animalistic nature, but on a social level, what is not acceptable in my family, my community, my country, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And so we're fighting like our desires, our true desires versus these other forces. And so that's the some we're aware of and some we're not aware of. Most of it we're not aware of. And so that's why Freud and Jung, like they really bonded over the dream world and the unconscious. And really what's like Jung would use that, or I guess it came from Freud, that word association where you would say, black, and then you would say what the first word that comes to your mind. And so it's like kind of revealing a little bit. So it's like there's more to you than just what you're conscious of.
Absolutely.
And there's more to you than just, I desire something, so I'm going to make it happen. And there's no other force stopping me. Or would you think that maybe early man thought those forces that were stopping them weren't from that conditioning, but from the gods and fate? And I think still people believe that, like when things don't happen in their life, that are like, I want something, I want to create wealth, I want to find a relationship, I want to get better health, I want to lose weight. But there's this other force we can sort of say, well, that's just not my timing, or, there's something outside of me.
Yeah, and we certainly see it in the history of clinical psychology, where people thought people were possessed by demons, by something external to them because they acted very strangely and in bizarre ways. So they thought, surely this must be a spirit.
Well, also the concept of the evil eye, placing an evil eye or a spell on someone, and that's why, or that you basically were a bad person, so you're not ever going to be happy, those kind of things. But this psychodynamic is more like there's these other parts of ourselves that are working, and they're not all human, they're all like the spiritual nature as well. And that's where Freud and Jung split. It was Freud thought it was just all the instincts and kind of our animal instincts that we have to repress, where Jung saw us more of a complex human creature with spiritual experiences.
Yes, but the psychodynamic school, the big picture of it, right, is that from this idea that Freud initiated, then many schools evolved from there. So you have object relations theory, you have self-psychology, ego psychology schools that evolved out of there and are still very strong in the world today, and used in psychotherapy a lot, and in some instances in coaching. But that is kind of the gift and the contribution that Freud and Jung made to psychology, that they gave rise to this way of seeing the mind in a very rich and deep way.
Like we're more complex than we on the surface. We're not simple creatures. And so that going back to not complex, Skinner, behaviorism. And I find it fascinating when I learned about Skinner, because he was very much in watching a person's actions and reactions, and that's basic, almost like very mechanical way of looking at a human being. It's the kind of the carrot and the stick idea that they're kind of
reward
like
and punishment.
Reward and punishment, yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of his work was with animals. He observed animals in cages, in controlled lab experiments. And he then deduced that, well, these principles are very powerful and can be tested in the laboratory. Therefore, human beings are no exception. We are conditioned by our environment, by the rewards and the punishments that we experience in everyday life.
But human beings have a more complex brain system and have the ability to make decisions and reason more than animals.
Well, that was Skinner's,
because we're not animals, so you can't measure an animal. I mean, we are from animals, but we can't measure.
Yeah, that's where Skinner would disagree.
I know, but
he says we're biological beings just like any other animal. Therefore, we're subject to the same contingencies of conditioning.
But I think a lot of people that I've met before they did the individuation process with Jung, they kind of fall into that idea that if I can behave myself through change, like I just force myself to go and take action, and the mind doesn't really have a say. It's more that mechanical, like I'm going to go work out, I'm going to commit. I don't care if my mind is screaming at me. I'm just going to go and work out, and it works for a while. You give yourself a reward or whatever, but do you want to get to the root of why it's so hard? Why are you so resistant to this? Why are you so resistant to work hard or to stay in the game? I know a lot of motivational speakers. It's just like, go through it. Don't worry about the fear. Just go, go, go. And without that self-examination of understanding, well, what is really going on? And maybe what this thing I want isn't really what I need. And maybe that's what my spirit is resisting. So it's that kind of a very mechanical way to see us as like conditioned beings, that there's no spiritual or insight or intellect involved.
Yeah, and Skinner was adamant that because you cannot observe the spiritual element or even the mind, he says, what's the point of building a science of the mind if you cannot measure it, if you cannot see it? And therefore, that was his downfall, because we all know just from our own experience that there's a mind in us.
Something in talking to us.
Yes. And he was trying to deny that. But his writings are brilliant. People should not discount Skinner.
Because it's still a part of our being. We are conditioned creatures, and there is a biological element, but we can't just stop there. So the next level is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy or coaching, and it's bringing in the cognitive sciences. By Beck and Ellis.
So it was kind of a compromise, right, between Freud and Skinner. That
they had a baby. It was called CBT.
That, okay, we acknowledge there is, let's say, behaviorism is very powerful and conditioning is a powerful force and still active, but there's a mind behind it experiencing those things. So CBT, which is cognitive behavioral theory or therapy, Aaron Beck, Albert Ellis, these guys really took it to the next level and developed a science around it, or a very strong theory that when we are conditioned through the environment, let's say we develop a phobia, we develop a bad habit, that there's a mind experiencing that, and that the mind itself can then start to work its way out of it. That I can reason and say, this is hurting me.
Like an excuse. Well, or also excuse, like when you're doing something that's uncomfortable, you're like, let's say the workout phenomenon. You can push yourself to go work out, or you can think positive and say, I'm going to work out every day, and that's going to help you a little bit more. But then there's also the other part of the mind that's saying, hey, you don't need to work out. It's okay. Just do it tomorrow. And then you start to get into that reasoning of the excuses and the stories of, it's kind of rainy out today, or, you did a good job this week. You can do it tomorrow, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and then
because
cognitive behavioral is like looking at that narrative more and the behavior and how they match together, and the inconsistencies or the incoherency.
Right, because you can question your own thoughts. You can ask, am I really stuck in this, or can I do something about it? right? And you were examining your own thoughts, which is a kind of a very ancient philosophy as well, right? The Greeks were kind of used to doing this stuff. And in Buddhism, we see this kind of
meditation,
this
quiet your mind.
self-reflection. And so it's very old, but it was kind of packaged in this new way. Cognitive behaviorism is the way to go because it addresses both the mind and your actions, right? So it's not neglecting one or the other.
So it's really good for addictions or changing behaviors, motivation, that type of thing. But it doesn't, the limit of it is that it doesn't talk about, it's really basically shining up the ego. Like it's not like we're a psychodynamic model. You're looking at the unconscious, you're looking at more of a, like a deeper sense of who you are and like almost like a more wide range or complexity to you and even evolving out of your old personality. Like Jung talks about individuation, where cognitive behavior is like, I'm an ego and I have this bad habit of thinking and feeling and doing. I'm going to change my ego to have it think, feel, and do better. And so it's good. It's a good start. I think that's where a lot of people start in personal development. That's where I started. And it gives you that lift and gives you that like, ooh, I can actually change my destiny if I change my thoughts and my feelings. But it's limiting because you're really just framing it from the ego perspective, which is that you are this individual. You're not a spiritual being, you're a physical being having these human, doing this human change. And then you're still the same person. You're just thinking and feeling better. Like the identity doesn't change.
It's one of the most dominant models right now because it's able to be tested and measured. You can measure progress, you can measure behavioral changes, and therefore it has a lot of research support. So it's a good model to base your therapies, your psychologies, your coaching on.
And a lot of times people, that's what they want. They really don't want a spiritual solution. They just want to get their life better. And it works for people that aren't looking for those deeper answers. They just want to change their habits. And it's very effective.
The criticism, like you said, is that it's not dealing with the whole person. Yeah, you're targeting certain behaviors, certain parts of the mind or aspects of the mind, but not the totality of the human being. So the biomedical model, which is now,
the most popular.
I would say, it's probably the most popular, but also the least understood by the public, because it's a difficult thing to understand what the brain is doing and what it's doing biologically and through all these neurotransmitters and neurochemistry. I mean, it requires some study and some dedication and some understanding. And then the way the public gets it is through these sound bites that the media uses to entice people to read stories on what the brain is doing. And so people start to think kind of very, very kind of simplistic and erroneous ways about what neuroscience is.
Well, I think the biggest one for me was this whole idea of like what your brain's doing when it's in love, and it like discounts like this soulful spiritual element of bonding and having a love relationship, and it's just a bunch of neurons firing, and that's it. And if you change your neurons, you're wired for love. I think that's one of the books, like talking about the wiring. Now, yes, there's truth to it. Like when you are in a state of love, the brain is activating, but they're making the assumption that the brain is the cause versus the brain is just activated in a certain state that reflects the deeper sense of self.
Yeah.
And so also like, change your brain, change your life,
rewire
your brain, all that. And then it's still almost like a little bit deeper than like very close to the cognitive behavioral model is that kind of like if I think positive and I listen to positive affirmations every day, I'm wiring my brain to think in this way. Yes, but it's almost like I always say affirmations are like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. It's like it's such a like we have billions of thoughts and we're trying to like isolate one or two that's going to rewire. It just seems like an ineffective way to work from the hardware versus the software. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? The hardware versus that's the brain, and we were thinking it was just working on the hardware, and then there's also the software, which is all the other things that are happening in our experience.
Yeah, so here again we come to the ancient question of what is spirit and what is matter, right? What is the brain and what is the mind? And is there a difference, or are they the same thing? From the neurobiomedical model perspective, they say consciousness, meaning your mind, your awareness, is arising as an emergent property out of all the interactions of your brain, all the neurons firing and communicating with each other. That gives rise to your sense of yourself, your awareness. That's the biomedical model.
But if you think about someone who had a near-death experience where there was no brain activity, but they were aware, and then they come back and they see the doctor in the room and they have this experience, it's like, well, then that would discount that theory, wouldn't it?
That's right. So they call this the hard problem of consciousness, that it doesn't really kind of fit in with what human beings experience as their mind. That, yeah, it would be a great idea to think, well, everything we can kind of figure everything out from the brain. If we understand the brain, we'll understand essentially everything about the mind. But it's not that simple. We start to see that when we take that approach, there's phenomena that we cannot explain through that model, through that physical model.
And so, again, quite simply, the brain is not the cause. It's really, well, I guess it's a brain world interaction, the spirit, consciousness, and the matter interacting. So it's not like one is more than the other, but you can't say one is the cause, like it's the sole cause. And
so let's address this one first because it's such an important one. The chemical imbalance model that emerged out of the biomedical model that is used to explain a lot of mental health conditions. So you'll see it on TV, right? So it's a common one that if you're depressed, there's a neurotransmitter imbalance in your brain that if you take this pill, this substance, it will rebalance it and you'll be fine. You'll feel better. That's a powerful statement and explanation of depression. Is it true? There's some research that kind of supports that, but a lot of it doesn't.
Well,
really.
The thing is that in these drugs to be authorized, they just have to do a little bit more than the placebo.
Yeah.
But it's not that much. It's like, oh, there's one case or a couple cases, and then they're able to pass it. And I think a lot of it could be placebo as well. We don't know that it could be.
Well, the placebo is always studied. Let's say every experiment that they do, if they do it right, has to account for the placebo effect. So they know it's a very powerful effect. They usually don't mention it, of course. They just say this drug has been proven or supported by research to improve depression, right? Your symptoms of depression are going to go away or improve if you take this medication.
And well, again, think about this from a spiritual perspective. It's like, what is depression? Do I just want to feel happy, or do I want to get to the root of what is my spirit aching for? Like, what is the true problem? And I think we're working on the symptom of having these down feelings. I'm not motivated. Those are symptoms. And then when we take medication, just like everything else in the medical model, is we're kind of making sure the symptoms go away, but many times not addressing the core problem, core root, which is the question of who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? If we had those answers, if an individual can have those answers, it could help them free their mind, and then eventually their brain would produce more oxycontin, or what is it called, oxytocin, and all these feel-good chemicals that will start bringing them to more balance in a natural way. Now, we're not discounting, like, there are people that actually need medication, would you say? It's not like we're discounting it, but if we just stop there and we just think, just take a pill and your life will be better, it's such a limited way to work with our potential and who we are as human beings and spiritual beings.
Yeah, I think you hit upon something there. That it's not that these are wrong. It's simply that a lot of there's politics that plays into these models where people want to state that this is the only way to see the mind or the brain. And it's much healthier and it's much more productive to think in terms of, well, these are different models, and all models kind of have a truth or a reality to them. And if we consider that perspective, then it gives us a bigger picture and a better picture of what we're dealing with.
So we don't want to lose some of the great minds, which we're going to be talking about more in this series. We want to take, the gems of it, and then how does it all fit in together? Like, we don't want to discount that the brain wires a certain way, that there's neuroplasticity. We want to use that, but we can't just use that in its isolation. We want to take the whole picture and address the whole being, which is also beyond just the physical.
That's right. And then just to kind of round it out, and of course this is not a comprehensive list, but evolutionary psychology has been playing a big role now in recent developments in psychology.
Could you describe what that is?
So it's the idea that there's adaptation going on, that the way our brains function and our mind has evolved is adaptive. We think this way, we feel this way, we perceive the world this way because it was adaptive for us. In other words, it helped us survive. And
so it's like a Donald Hoffman talks about?
Yes, Donald Hoffman out of the University of California. This idea that the way we perceive the world is simply there, or it functions the way it functions because it helped us survive.
Wow.
So the other one is sociocultural psychology, or some people call it multicultural psychology, which is the idea that culture also shapes the way we perceive, the way we act, and that context of the culture and the behavior is so important to understand, because if you go to another country and you look people in the eye very directly and you speak very frankly, in their culture that might be considered very bad behavior.
You don't even have to go to another country. When I was in New York, grew up in New York City area, New Jersey, I brought my jersey to Colorado, and I would just be very direct, because we didn't waste our time. We were like, "Hi, sweetie, how you doing today? Lovely day." I'd be like, "Hey, did you get this done?" And people would assume that I was being mean or aggressive, and even just the way we talk is a little, like, the way we say words is a little short and to the point. And direct, and actually sometimes more honest. Right. and then it's just, like in Colorado, people were like, "Oh, this is really like you're such a tough girl." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I said something in a very easy sentence, but interpreted differently." So yeah, we all have that kind of laws and rules in our culture. And then also when it comes to psychology and mental health, different cultures have a different attitude about it. Some of them, if you need mental health work, you're crazy, right? In some cultures, and it's like in the West, it's a little more accepted that people have coaches and therapists, but in some cultures, it's like there's something really wrong with you if you have to get mental health. And we don't talk about our feelings, and we don't talk about anything to do with stress or depression or any of that stuff. It's kind of off the table.
Absolutely. And then finally, personality psychology, which is a bit unknown to the public, but it's such a rich school that really instructs us on what is the nature of what we call the personality. And,
so like the Big Five.
Theodore Milan, incredible work both in clinical psychology and in social psychology, looking at the development of personality. So we'll be maybe talking a little bit about that too as we go along in the series.
This is an extra long episode. We had a lot to cover. And so I just want to end with this idea that, so the question, we're going back to the beginning of time, which is, why are we here? What is, who am I? Why are we here? What's my purpose? And when we think about the brain and we think about this neuroscience, we're actually seeing what the ancients talked about in Eastern philosophy about, that we're seeing this Maya, this kind of illusory expression of through our mind of the world. It's like a distorted reality. It's not an absolute reality. It's an apparent reality. And now the latest in perceptual sciences are showing us the same thing, how our brain is processing color and spatial recognition, all this information that is, like you said, from that evolutionary, we're looking at things from a survival mechanism, and we're missing out on so much. And so we're studying this neuroscience. It brings us actually back to what's really going on in consciousness. And so the question is there something more to us than just our brain and our thoughts and our behavior, or are we part of something bigger? And this is where Jung brought in the spirit part of psychology, which, some other psychotherapy and models work with it a little bit, but Jung was basically in a world of his own when he was saying, yes, this is the true reason why we're here, is to know ourself, this self, the big self. Not just to get things and to not be sad and be happy in life. Those are great things, but really the true purpose of life is to know who we really are. And by now saying like our mind is misperceiving reality, now we have to see, well, what are we misperceiving? How are we shaping our assumptions about the world and ourself, and what limits us, and what is possible by understanding this? So now we're getting to a deeper realm of personal growth and development.
Yeah, and I think as we question more consciousness and what is consciousness, then Jung's work and Eastern philosophy's perspective on consciousness will become more relevant to us. And it'll help us in kind of putting all the puzzle pieces together. What we're learning about the brain and the neurobiology of it, how does it fit into our understanding of dreams, awareness, consciousness, and what does it all mean? How do we put it to work so that we can solve these very human problems that we're facing?
And how do we look at the big picture of all the contributions our ancestors and past wisdom teachers have taught us about the mind and ourselves, and how we can, really see that there's nothing wrong really about what they taught. At the time, it might have been right, and then we evolve. But what can we take? Because there's wisdom in everything, and so to be more inclusive of what is really happening for ourselves, and then how do we really explore that question of who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What is this world? All those big questions. So the next episodes, we will be delving deeper into the great minds. We're going to go deeper into some of these great minds of women and men who have been on the forefront of psychology, of mysticism, of the brain sciences, and then also spiritual development. And we think you'll really enjoy this series. So stay tuned. Again, with that said, if you don't want to miss this series, please subscribe to the channel here if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you are listening to us on the podcast through Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, all those great podcast services, make sure you subscribe, because we don't want you to miss this series. It's going to be fantastic. So hope you have a great day. Hope we gave you some food for thought, and maybe think about what you've been working with, your own personal development journey, and what pieces have you been putting in, and maybe what pieces maybe you're like, oh, I never thought of that. That's missing, that you can integrate into your own whole development.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, take care.
Stay well.